We're going to be in 1 Samuel 18, but go back to 1 Samuel. I know Philip tried his best to get us out of David and Goliath, and I'm heading right back in there. But in chapter 17, I want you to see something before we start. In 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel 17, verse 24. Remember what happens when they're all trying to figure this out. David shows up. It says, as soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant, the men asked. He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He'll give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. That was the grand prize. The problem with that grand prize, it was offered by Saul, who isn't exactly faithful to what he says. But that was the grand prize. You can have a wife, you can have one of Saul's daughters, and you'll be exempted, you and your family, from paying taxes, right? And that was meant to kind of, an incentive, that's the exact word. But nobody took that incentive, right? Nobody but David was even willing to take that. But that was the deal. I just want you to remember, that was the deal. That's what Saul had said. What's amazing is David really doesn't care about that. He asks about it. He keeps asking about it. But David's amazing because David's more concerned with the spiritual stuff. David fought not for the woman and not for the taxes breaks, but he fought because he says, how does this Philistine, this uncircumcised Philistine, come against Israel and come against God? And so, but that was the deal. So go to chapter 18, verse 17. God is protecting David. God, look, Saul reigns for 40 years. There's a long time in between David's preparation and David actually becoming king. And David, in the last verses that Philip read from chapter 18, verse 14, he succeeded in everything he did. And he succeeded because the Lord was with him. And that made Saul frightful because in coming against David, you're coming against God. Israel and Judah loved David because he was so successful at leading his troops into battle. So everybody loves David, which is a problem for Saul. Saul is scared of David. He's jealous of David. There's all kind of things going on, right? And the enemy, the devil, wants Saul to kill David. You imagine if the devil had got to David. You imagine if Satan had been able to kill David, the ramifications of that. But he's God's man. He's God's king. And God was going to save him over and over and over. And we've been speaking about on a Sunday morning how God meets with his people. And God, before David even becomes king, he's king. He's been anointed, but he's not actually put in place till a while from now. And yet God is meeting with him. God is preparing him. Everything. I mean, by the time David actually physically becomes king, there's so much he knows about God. One day, verse 17 of chapter 18, one day Saul said to David, I'm ready to give you my older daughter. There's been this pause. Has this been time? I mean, that should have been done pretty quick, right? That was the deal. You win, you beat Goliath, you get one of my daughters. He says, I'm ready to give you my older daughter, Merab, as your wife. Whenever people are not true to their word, that's a problem, right? But whenever people are not faithful, you know God is, right? And so people, we hear these stories, and I kind of wish I'd experienced that. Back in the day, deals were done not with long contracts, but with a handshake, right? Like your word meant something, and if you said, I'll do it, you just presumed they would do it. Well, Saul has made this great, grandiose promise of, you can have one of my daughters, and you can have relief from the taxes. Maybe he doesn't think he'll ever have to pay it, or maybe he thinks he'll just get rid of who knows what Saul is thinking. But he says, okay, I'm ready to give you my older daughter, Merab, as your wife. And then there's these words that show you exactly where Saul's at. But first, there's an amendment to the deal. There's nothing worse than signing on to a deal and then someone coming back with a different clause. Right. Aren't you glad that when you read the scripture, God doesn't change his word, that God doesn't change the deal? Amen. God doesn't come behind and say, we've all dealt with people like that, right? It's frustrating. And David now, but the part in this, what's amazing is David is so calm about all of it. It was never about the lady. It was never about the taxes. Look at what it says. You must prove yourself to be a real warrior. Well, that in itself, That in itself doesn't make any sense. He's already proved. It said he every time he goes into battle, he was successful. And by the way, beating the giant, beating Goliath, that should give you real warrior status, right? But Saul now is changing the rules. And this is kind of what the devil does, right? He hangs out these carrots, you get to the carrot, and then the rule changes. He does that all the time. Like, if you just get there, hey, I promise, if we just get there, you'll be fine. And you get there, and then he's like, oh, by the way. And it's just this continual lie, this continual frustration. And what's really weird to me is David handles this so well. What was the biggest sin of David's life? Bathsheba, right? He had many wives, at least 8 or something, and then concubine. I mean, he went down a bad path sexually. But at this moment, he's so into God, having the wife, having the woman didn't mean much to him. I don't mean that to be funny, but he didn't have, something happens. Because at this point, he's not complaining and running to Saul and say, hey, you owe me tax-free living and a woman. He doesn't seem to be bothered by that. He's just serving God and he's content. Obviously, something happens in David's life because he starts doing what he shouldn't be doing. He has multiple wives, he has concubines. All of that was forbidden. But at this point, it says, you must prove yourself to be a real warrior by fighting the Lord's battles. The last thing Saul was bothered about was fighting the Lord's battles. The Lord's battle certainly wasn't killing David. Philip touched on this last week. I found this really interesting right at the end. Look at what it says. For Saul thought, this is the truth. And by the way, you'll notice this in people. You'll see it. When you ever heard someone's excuse and it just doesn't make sense? When we play this game of, I don't really want to tell you the truth. Whether that's humiliating, embarrassing, you don't think they'll believe it. And so what we do is we make up this story which is so bad that it's worse than just telling the truth. I mean, Saul with a straight face can't really be saying, hey, you need to be a real warrior for me. He's done that. That doesn't make any sense at all. But you see, when we don't tell the truth, we have, for instance, the big way we do this is, are you okay spiritually? All the signs are we're not. But we say what? We are. Or then you ask people, what happened? And they give this ludicrous answer that you put in your mind and you think that can't possibly be what happened. It just can't. Saul now is saying, I want you to fight the Lord's battles. I need you to prove yourself. But the reality is, that doesn't make sense. None of that makes sense. David has proven that. In a court of law, that doesn't hold up. But look what the real reason is. For Saul really thought, I'll send him out against the Philistines and let them kill him, rather than doing it myself. So there's the truth. Saul wanted to kill him himself. He didn't have the guts to do that. He probably knew he couldn't do that. That would have been a political suicide because all the people loved David. In his heart, he was a murderer. He wanted David dead, and so he came up with this plan that if I can just disguise it, oh, he died, that's a shame, he gets what he wants. What Philip said is true. You start to see where David got his idea from, don't you? David does the same thing. He puts Uriah in position in a war to make it look like you got killed. But really, David has organized this because he wants Uriah dead. It's crazy. It's crazy how he saw what came against him. He knew what it was like to be on that side of it, and yet he does the very same thing. What's crazy is when you've experienced something, like if you've been conned, you know the best way to con someone else? Run the same plan. Think about that. If you've been conned and you fell for it and you want to con someone else, what do? Same thing they did to you. David is in this position that agent now later with Uriah comes out and he says, and this is what's amazing. He doesn't David is so content in God. I don't know how else to say it. David is doing so well at this moment. Wouldn't you be flustered by this point? Wouldn't you want to say, I beat Goliath, that was the deal. I mean, you could have all of this like fleshly reaction. He says, who am I and what is my family in Israel, verse 18, that I should be the king's son-in-law? David exclaimed, my father's family is nothing. Do you see that David rightfully kind of won the right to have Saul's daughter? Saul changes the rules. Really, he's trying to kill David so he doesn't have to let his daughter marry him. And how upset about is David? In fact, he's so humble that he says, you know what? I'm not even worthy of being the king's son-in-law. My family is nothing. He's not upset. He's not. Listen, if you don't think this is a big deal, let someone change the rules on you and you be that humble. Like David is doing so well at the moment. And this joy, because he's met with God and God has shown. I mean, David and Goliath was a pretty good indication of who God was. And so in verse 19, when the time came, and now again, whenever you win a victory, whenever you've got joy and peace, whenever you're humble, whenever the devil is testing you and throwing out all these things, and God is refining you, and God is walking with you, and you're having victory, and life is good, and you and God are close, and you're learning things, and everything's great, and David's doing fantastic, and Saul's messing around. And that's a big trap, right? When people do you wrong, the trap is to let your inside man get infected. The next time someone does you wrong, it's never about what they've done. The battle, when someone steals money from you, it's not about the money. It's about what that situation does to your inner man. That's the whole thing. The devil couldn't care what you lose, what you gain. It's not about money. He can do it throughout money, different thing. But when you are done wrong, right? When someone does you, and if you live long enough, people are going to do you wrong. I mean, no one's willing to say no one's ever done me wrong, right? Either that or you're very, very naive. People have done you wrong. People have done you dirty. And our flesh wants to what? Get even, right? Shout, complain. And that's what this amazing thing, even with Egypt, be still and just stand there and I'll take care of it. And the Egyptians you see today, you'll never see again. And so when people do you wrong, what the devil loves is a fleshly reaction. If I get mad, if I start doing, well, I'm going to get you back. If I act in retaliation, the devil loves it. That's exactly where he wants me. But how does the world explain a reaction like David's? Like, who in the world without God could have that reaction? Go and rip a lost person off and see if they can have joy and peace. A lost person has to respond a certain way because there's no way to have peace. David has this peace and this joy. He's like, look, I'm not even worthy. And first of all, it was never about the taxes of the woman. It was about God. I'm not doing it for the woman or the taxes. I'm doing it for God. The taxes and the woman wouldn't have been enough to fight. But when Goliath talked mess about God, that was it. That's why he fought. The glory of God. And so, obviously he says, I need you to prove that you're a fighter. So obviously in time, David just keeps proving that because God's with him. And then look what happens. My father's family is nothing. Verse 19. So when the time came for Saul to give his daughter Merab in marriage, here it is. He's going to do the right thing. You were endured. Good job. Here's your prize. He gave her instead to Adriel, a man from Mahola. So right before the wedding, Saul says about that, I'm giving her to someone else. How much peace and joy do you have at the moment? How much do you want to just go and slap Saul? And David is fine. I mean, I don't know who the strongest person you've ever met spiritually is, but if you're ready to marry someone and then the father-in-law comes and says, we're going to switch. It's probably hard to react to that, isn't it? It's humiliating. It'd be hurtful. And yet, David continually in the psalm says, I find my refuge, I find my peace, I find my joy in who? In God. All right. Verse 20. The story continues. And if you don't think God has a sense of humor, then you just need to read some of these stories. Like if you try and mess around with God, you know he's too big to mess with, right? Saul thinks whenever the enemy thinks he's won, guess what? Whenever hell is celebrating, they should be, by now, whenever hell celebrates, they should be like, what's happening? Like hell has never celebrated winning a victory and it ended up well for them. Whatever the devil means for harm, God always turns out for what? I've said this a million times. When the devil asks permission, and I believe he has to, for him to do something, and God says yes, he should relinquish that straight away. When the devil says to God, hey, can I do this? And God says, go ahead. You should know, like, whoa, why are you saying yes to that? Because God's going to use it. God doesn't sometimes win. He all the time wins. So Saul thinks he's savvy, right? And here's part of sometimes, because you are reacting so well, the devil will stretch it further. Like maybe if David responds and wants a showdown with Saul, maybe if David wants to come now and kill Saul, maybe Saul slows down, but God has been so gracious to David. David is so good in his response. It's almost like, here's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes when you're walking with the Lord and when you have peace and grace and joy, people think they can take you even further. In other words, if people treat you bad and you just respond with joy, then they what? Then they might try and push the envelope even further. And so God has this sense of humor. So Saul has done this switch, and he can't marry his daughter, but look what happens. Michal had fallen in love with David, so his other daughter falls in love with him. Saul's got another problem. This is what happens. You start messing with God, and God's like, oh, you're doing good, but now you got another problem. You ever felt like when you're on the run from God or when you're struggling, it's just like, whoa, you think you're slick, you think you're savvy, but here's your next problem, and here's your next problem, and here's your next problem. And so one of his daughters now had fallen in love with David. And Saul was delighted when he heard about it, because he just wanted David in his family. Is that why? Look at what it says. Saul was delighted. This is how ignorant and arrogant Saul is. Saul doesn't see it as God messing with him and God trying to show him something. Saul thinks now he's got a what? Another chance to kill him. And so, Saul was delighted when he heard about it. Here's another chance to see him killed by the Philistines. Saul said to who? Himself. He couldn't tell anybody else because everyone else would side with who? And it's almost like if I say it out loud, then God will hear it. But if you say it to yourself, guess what?
God still hears it.
Think it, he knows it. Look at what it says. Look at what it says. Then Saul told his men to say to David, here's another chance to see him killed by the Philistines, Saul said to himself. But to David, today you have a second chance to become my son-in-law. You can see why David would be like, well, I'm not really that bothered at this point. Saul told his men to say to David, you see, there's an insecurity, there's a weakness in Saul. He's not being truthful with who? With anybody. The king has all this power, right? But he will not go and really speak or challenge who? He won't challenge David. Because deep down he knows he's wrong. And deep down he knows he's not challenging David, he's challenging who? And so he tells his men, go and say it. And I know this is different because when the king tells you, you kind of have to. But look, there are people, maybe even at church, that say, hey, I don't want to say that. Will you say it? You should stop back and think about that a sec. Like when people say, I don't want to do it, but will you do it? I've seen it happen. Will you say that to them? Well, why don't you say it? Well, I don't want them getting mad at me. Oh, well, thank you. That's great. That's my honor. Look at what he says. The king really likes you and so do we. That's a lie. He doesn't have the guts to sit down with David and even try and remotely say that. Why don't you accept the king's offer and become his son-in-law? When Saul's men said these things to David, he replied, how can a poor man from a humble family afford the bride price for the daughter of a king? David's like, listen, even if I wanted to, the price that you're going to charge me is, I can't afford that. Remember how they did it? The father got to pick the price, the dowry. So if you want to marry my daughter, here's how much it's going to cost. And by the way, at this point, how much do you trust Saul anyway? When Saul's men said these things to David, verse 23, he replied, how can a poor man from a humble family afford the bride price for the daughter of a king? When Saul's men reported this back to the king, he told them, tell David, This is kind of gross, but it's what it says. I want for the bride price is 100 Philistine foreskins. Awesome. I'm getting into territory you don't want to be in because you got to bring them back. You got to kill them, do that. Anyway, you can figure it out. And then he lies straight again. Vengeance on my enemies is all I really want. No, that's not the truth. That's not the truth. And your actions are showing it. So you can only say something so much without your actions betraying what you're saying. He keeps saying it's not about David, but it's clear it is. And it's going to become clearer and clearer. And so he says, I just want to kill the Philistines. But what Saul had in mind was that David would be killed in the fight. The more Saul comes against, why is it good for David that Saul keeps coming after him? What's the upside? I mean, this is kind of a rough deal, right? But why? Now he's getting into a fight with Philistines, which David wouldn't mind that. He's killing God's enemies, so that's not a big deal. But do you think it's about like pleasing Saul? Every time Saul attacks David, David is meeting with God in more intimate ways. The more Saul pushes his agenda, the more trained, the more powerful, the more blessed David is. Every time the enemy moves through Saul, God and David are better off. David hasn't seen God just protect him with David and Goliath. He's going to see him with a spear. He's going to see him every day. All of this. I mean, Saul is doing David a favor. He doesn't seem like it. When you read the story, you're like, I would never thank God for Saul at this moment. But if you can figure this out, it'll change. And I don't say this. No, I understand the principle. Putting it in practice is harder. I'm not saying I'm perfect at this. But sometimes it's clear that the enemy is messing with you. Right? Whether it's through circumstance or people or whatever it might be. Saul is messing with David. And again, the battle is if I can get him flustered, if I can get him depressed, if I can just get David to outrageously sin, I've got him. You know, sometimes on your phone, it's a trap, right? Don't respond. Don't write what your flesh tells you to write. And yet, every time the devil moves, David and God are getting stronger and stronger. And David is continually seeing God's protection. So what I'm telling you is this. The circumstances that we hate, the people that are really giving us a hard time sometimes, whether it's a boss, a friend, whoever, whatever it is, we often get upset at them. We often want nothing to do with them. We often just say, God, would you do something with them? And yet it's those people. See, when you realize that, how do I put this? Saul, in a weird way, is David's greatest spiritual mentor. Like every time Saul moves in this stupid, vindictive, murderous way, David is growing spiritually. So when you understand that which the devil is coming against you is actually your avenue to be stronger and greater in God, instead of wanting it away, instead of just screaming and crying and moaning and beating your head off the wall, you're like, oh, thank you. And when you become thankful for Saul, not because of what it's hard naturally to be thankful for someone that wants you dead. But in Saul, there was something that David gained from Saul, a protection of God, a provision of God, a closeness to God, a desire to be by God. I mean, David has a rough time and he's on the run. And I'm not saying he was always happy, it was always easy. But man, it's a perspective. Like if you just see Saul as a murderer who hates you, who's jealous of you, you could get discouraged really quick. But every time the devil moves, God was doing this amazing thing. And so David was delighted to accept the offer. For the lady? No. Because he was defending God again, and he had no problem killing God's enemies. Before the time limit expired. It's interesting that there's a time limit, right? Do it quick, because if you do it quick, you might make a what? You might make a mistake. He and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines. So God didn't just give him 100, he gave him what? So that practically speaking, now Saul is in. You see, Saul keeps laying these traps. Oh, I just need 100. Because if there's 98 or 99, he's just going to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Try again. so I can kill him again. And God gives him how many? So Saul has no reason now what? And he actually has to relinquish this time. But look what it says. So David went out and killed 200 Philistines. So the devil's trying to kill David, right? But God's killing the enemy. So this whole thing has been set up by the devil and Saul to kill David. And God is using it to kill the enemy. So 200 Philistines are dead because Saul wanted to kill David. You see how God turns things around? Can I bring Saul against David? Sure. Why? Because in doing that, I'm going to kill 200 of your men, or of the Philistines, which helps Saul in a way, but God is beating his enemy. God is taking down Philistines. And God is using Saul, the king of Israel, to kill Philistines, but in a really weird way. You try and figure out God's plans. David fulfilled the king's requirement by presenting all their foreskins to him. That's great. So Saul gave his daughter Michal to David to be. He couldn't even do anything. I mean, that's just gross. That's just. I don't know there's anything I want that well to have to do that. I mean, that's bad. You kill him. Anyway. I mean, if this wasn't in there, you'd think, why would. Anyway. Saul gave his daughter to David. See, Saul is lost. He can't do anything. He's got 200. He's killed them. And now, and then sometimes men, especially, are slow on the uptake, right? No. David and Goliath should have been anybody's proof that David was with God. He's been victorious. Everything about David screams, you shouldn't be what you are, but God is somehow doing it with you. How are you still alive? How are you still making it? How do you have all this power? How do you have peace and joy? It's obviously that it's God. And then in verse 28 it says, when Saul realized, and there you go. That's the whole point of this. God is trying to speak and meet with Saul and be like, you realize who you're messing with, right? When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and how much his daughter Michal loved him, Saul became even more what? Okay, at that moment when he realized that God was with David, what should he have done? I mean, if you're Saul and everything you try is backfiring, now you just done lost your daughter anyway. And by the way, what does Saul hate more than anything? The renown of David. And now David's renown is just what? And see, every time you try and manipulate, every time someone's trying to come against you, just watch. You don't have to react. You don't have to respond. Just let God take care of it. Amen. So I'm trying to quench David. I want him dead. Instead, God's glorifying himself through David, and now 200 of them are dead. And David's renown is now bigger, thicker, deeper, greater. Saul became afraid of him. And so look, Saul's afraid, he's losing, and he said, he remained David's enemy for the rest of what? Every single day that Saul lived from this point, he viewed David as a what? Why is that such a problem with Saul? Why is that such a problem for Saul? Because David is God's what? And so in becoming an enemy of David, you were automatically putting yourself on the wrong side of God. And the root cause, see, this is what I'm saying. What's wrong with Saul? You could say all this stuff. You could make all these excuses. Hatred, jealousy, murderer. That's what the problem was. But he's not going to say that. So instead of saying it, we just let our actions say it. Verse 30. Meanwhile, do you see how many of us would be comfortable with the king being our sworn enemy? Yeah, it didn't bother David at all. Why? Did David go to bed thinking, I'll just take Saul out? I'm not bothered. In fact, he has a chance, we'll know later, he has a chance twice to kill Saul, and he won't what? Do you know how much self-control that takes? You've got an enemy who has tried to kill you, and you've got him dead to rights. You've got him dead to rights when he's sleeping and then when he's in the cave. You can kill him, and no one's going to care. And David's like, I can't do it. I won't do it. The self-control and the, man. And that's weird again, right? And that shows you how, what's the word? How difficult it is to be full of the Spirit in every area. When David can kill Saul, and I know he won't touch the Lord anointed, but when David has a chance to kill Saul, he has the most self-control you've ever seen in your life. But he takes a glimpse at Bathsheba, and guess what happens? Self-control is absolutely 100% gone out the window. Don't you see that's how fragile we are? Don't you see that's why being spiritually mature is so difficult? That there are areas in your life where self-control is easy. Nobody's bad at every area. There are areas where you have self-control. But then there are areas, guess what? You don't. And we look at people who don't have the same self-control in certain areas and we're like, how in the world is that a problem to you? And yet they might think the same thing about you. And so David has this spiritual ability to say no. And yet when Bathsheba comes around, he can't help him. Well, he could have, but he didn't. And look what happens. So imagine David giving this testimony like, hey, if you want to grow in God, you have to be hated by the king. You have to kill people. You have to, put yourself on the line. Every time the commanders of the Philistines attacked, David was more successful against them than all the rest of Saul's officers. Every time the devil put David in a fight, God just continued to what? To grow David's renown, but to grow his renown and to grow the relation. Do you think David went home thinking he was somebody? David knew the only reason he was winning. What do you need to know in life more than anything? That God is with you and for you. When that was clear, everything else is fine. Every time he fought, David was more and more successful. So David's name became what? Yeah. How much is Saul winning? I mean, what percentage of this is Saul winning? He's the king. He holds all the... That's what our mind thinks. I can't fight the king. I can't fight the devil. Hold on. Saul isn't winning at all. God has taken over and God is winning this to the nth degree. And it's nothing to do... See, it's nothing to do with David's renown. Because David is this picture of God. He's this picture, again, biblically, he's this picture of Jesus. But David is this picture of what happens when you're with God. David was witnessing to the Philistines. He was witnessing to his men. He was witnessing to Saul and his men. And God just kept making his name greater and greater and greater through David. Chapter 19. Saul urged his servants. One thing God is good at. Do you think there's a reason why David and Jonathan became friends? The Bible says, and Philip talked about it, the Bible says that David and Jonathan became friends, not weird friends, not people now, liberals, they want to make it, like he said, a sexual thing. They weren't sexual. But they had this love for each other right off the bat. And what Jonathan does, what Philip said, he took off all of the robes and all of that, and his way of saying, I acquiesce to you, man. I don't mind you being king. I'm good with it. I'll be your friend. How many true friends that you never doubt once do you have in your life? God put Jonathan in David's life and and it's never a one-way street, by the way. David gets great benefits from Jonathan. But Jonathan gets great benefit from... Can you imagine having a friend like David? And can you imagine having a friend like Jonathan? Iron sharpens iron. This is the way it was meant to work. And God puts David and Jonathan together. And instantly they're like, hey, they trust each other. They love each other in a spiritual way. And Saul... You ever heard the phrase, just let them hang themselves? And by that, what that means is, just let them make the mistake and they'll... David is just serving God, and Saul keeps making these colossal mistakes. Because Saul doesn't have the wisdom and the authority and the power. So what Saul doesn't realize is, God has been so powerful through David that Jonathan is more aligned to David than he is Saul. Why? How can you turn against your dad that quick? Apart from he's a raging nutball. But why? I mean, why else? Why else? Because Jonathan understands that being close to David is being close to God. And being close to Saul and his antics and his agenda is nothing but straight from the devil. And can God put someone in your life at just the right time? And they come together. And Saul urged his servants and his son Jonathan. That's a mistake. You should never have told Jonathan. We worry about all the time about who knows what. And you know, when God wants the enemy to slip up, that can happen real easy. Saul is committing an error here by telling Jonathan. He should have been savvy enough to say, leave him out the loop. He urges Jonathan to assassinate David. It's funny how people make alliances that they don't know are killing them and not the people that they're trying to kill. Jonathan, because of his strong affection for David. Well, who gave Jonathan this strong affection for David? Why? Because God is protecting David. And so he just sends Jonathan. And by the way, what a prayer. Hey, God, the king hates me. Will you give me his son to help me? I know that David ever prayed that, but that's exactly what God did. Hey, Saul's going to come against you. But I've changed the heart and mind of Jonathan. And he'll defend you. He'll help you. What an amazing thought. Like, God, you worked all of this out. Yeah. And David has to see this. He has to know this, right? Jonathan, because of his strong affection for David. And by the way, how much does God really have to show you before you trust the king's son? I mean, logically, this could be an inside job, right? Get done by Jonathan. Jonathan's like, oh, go there, stay the night. But from the beginning, God has cemented this friendship. Jonathan, because of his strong affection for David, verse 2, told him what his father was planning. I just want you to put yourself in that place. It's not an idle threat because Saul's what? Saul's king. How at peace, how calm are you if someone comes to you and says, by the way, the president's going to kill you tomorrow? Like if there's an assassination list, then you're on it. My father is planning to kill you. He's planning to assassinate you. How much you believe about God right there depends your exact reaction. Is David going to go and kill Saul himself? Is David going to lose it? What's going to happen? How much do you know God? This is why God's meeting with him. This is why even when Jonathan's telling him that, he knows through Jonathan that God is speaking, that God is good. Like you can't say, where's God, when you're staring at Jonathan, realizing that God has put this all together. Tomorrow morning, he warned him. Tomorrow morning, my dad's coming after you. You must find a hiding place out in the fields. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. Then I'll tell you everything I can find out. David is really, if Jonathan is playing games, David is really vulnerable. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. And I'll tell you everything I can find out. How many friends are willing to be, how many friends are willing to be that open and honest? How many people can look at you and say, my dad wants to kill you? Like we try and say, I can't tell them the truth for whatever reason. But Jonathan tells him and he says, I'll tell you everything I find out. Okay, so what's the deal? Find a hiding place and wait. And this is what God does, and it's also what the enemy uses. He says to him, my father is planning to kill you when? So what does that mean? If this was me, I'd rather say in 20 minutes. Let's just get this done. All night now he has to what? It doesn't tell you, but how well does David sleep? You're in a hiding place because the king wants to, and tomorrow morning, what does that mean? 7 a.m., 6 a.m., what are we doing? Our mental mind would be, is he going to find me? What time? I almost sleep with one eye open, right? But if you're content and restful in God, you've seen God could have taken David out with Goliath. God could have taken David out with all these Philistines. At some point, David has to believe, I'm not getting taken out. He's anointed me. I'm going to be king. The next morning, Jonathan, I find that interesting though. The devil uses time periods to frustrate us, and God uses the same time periods to build us up, to encourage us, to stretch our faith. Do you see why delay plays into both tactics? Have you ever wondered why you're in a delay? Lisa Smith is having her surgery tomorrow, and she said to me on the phone, I'm just glad we're finally getting there and it's tomorrow. Because if you've had, you know that, right? When they say it'll be 3 months away, oh, great. Look, we just want it to be what? And so lots of times in our life, there's these periods of delay. Like, why is this taking so long to get to a certain point? You know why it is? Because when the devil says, I want to delay this, God says, yeah, I want to delay it too. Because that night, do you see that night, wherever David is hiding, the devil's after him and God is using it. The devil's saying what? Don't trust God, so you're going to get all of these bizarre thoughts. And God is like, you just need to remember what he'd write. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I what? Why? Because you're with me. And so God is speaking to David. That it's almost like that good angel, bad angel, right? And I don't know about you. Have you ever had these thoughts like, it's okay, God's got me. And then you have this whisper in your head, but it's all going to kill you. So the next morning, Jonathan spoke with his father about David, saying many good things about him. The king must not sin against his servant David, Jonathan said. He's never done anything to harm you. Now think about that. How is that even possible? The guy's a raging lunatic. He's trying to kill you. You're the biggest warrior on the block. You've taken down Goliath. Why does Saul not get attacked by David? Because David fears the Lord and he understands spiritually. And do you see how crazy it is to be, in a minute he's going to be playing his harp again. How nuts is it to hear the guy that wants to assassinate you and then say, I'll sign up for harp and I'll play it for you. I mean, none of this makes any sense outside of God doing some amazing things. And he says, he's never done anything to harm you. You see, if David has retaliated or responded, how much that hurts his case. Don't retaliate. When the devil comes after you, when people are trying to wind you up, don't retaliate because that you lose. David has not retaliated against Saul, and that's one of his biggest strengths. Nobody has anything to say about David. And you know how frustrating it is for the devil who wants to bring you into this light, who wants to say these things about you? If he can't get you to respond, it's crazy how people get mad because you're not responding. And in not responding, you're actually disproving their case. Look at what it says. He's always helped you in any way he could. Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill a Philistine giant? And how who? And how the Lord brought a great victory to all Israel as a result. Politically, even, this was brilliant. Have you forgotten? Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life and brought a great victory? Man, that's us, isn't it? We've had these great spiritual victories, and then things don't go our way, and it's like we just have amnesia and we forget totally. I mean, Saul has benefited greatly from the hand of God through David, and now he wants to kill him. Why should you murder? God starts to ask these penetrating questions again. You were certainly happy about it then. Why should you murder an innocent man like David? What's the answer to that? Where is Saul's root problem? In his heart and in his mind and in his spirit. It always is. Your mind, your heart. It's always in a man. Looking at people and saying, stop doing that without actually fixing the inner man is futile. We see these things. You might see your kid do these things. And you're like, I wish you would stop doing that. Well, hold on. In order to stop doing that, they're going to have a new what? They're going to have to think differently. You can't say, I'm going to stop it without God transforming, healing your mind and your spirit. Saul's biggest problem is on the inside. And God is pointing that out. Why should you murder an innocent man like David? What's the answer to that? Well, you shouldn't, but what's the truth? If Saul's on a lie detector test, what is the truth? I'm jealous. Basically, that word kind of covers it, right? I'm jealous. And jealousy has led me to all of these other decisions. Lust led David to really bad decisions. Lust led David to all kinds of stuff. Why should you murder an innocent man? Until we understand that the battle is spiritual. Until we understand that the answer to life is always our inner man. Until we look at people, and it helps. When you look at someone who's acting spiritually out of kilter, when they're doing strange things, we sometimes like misunderstand. Listen, what's going on is a battle in their inner man. Why are they doing these things? They're doing these things because their heart and their mind and their spirit have been infected. And so what we need to pray is that God would restore them from where? From the inside. This is our battle. Guys, this is our battle. It's can you walk through life and have a full inner man? That's a challenge of your everyday life. I'm going to put you in circumstances. It's not about how much money you have. It's not about how much this and that you have. It's about, can you go to bed with joy and peace and power no matter what? And when you do that, the devil doesn't say, oh, we're never going to get him. He just ramps it up. And the real answer to why do you want David dead is because Saul has been wrecked in his inner man. And when we play the fool with God in his house, that's the answer. That's the answer. I'm messed up in my inner man. How many people have you ever heard say that to your face? How many people have ever come back to you, apologized and said, I'm sorry, I was just wrecked in my inner man? Has anyone ever had that? I have. But has anyone... Why? That can't possibly be the case, can it? You've been to church this long and no one has messed you around because of their inner man? That cannot be true. That's just not true. But you never hear it. Why? Because it's one of the strongest ways of getting right. That's why the devil fights it. You know how much power there is in saying, sorry, it wasn't that. It wasn't this. It was me. It's my inner man. It was wrecked and I'm sorry. But we're not good at saying that, are we? If no one's hardly ever heard that, how is that even remotely possible? And God is calling Saul out. Why would you want to kill an innocent man? Because my inner man is wrecked. It's wrecked. It's wrecked with jealousy. Jonathan says there's no reason for it all. There's no regular good reason. There's no reason, good reason. So Saul listened to Jonathan. And he vowed, as surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed. Well, that lasts about 5 minutes. Isn't it crazy how we take the word of other people and then don't do that with God? Like if you're going to believe anybody, start with God. Verse 7, afterward Jonathan called David and told him what had happened. He brought David to Saul, and David served in the court as before. That's crazy. Could you do that? Could you serve in the court of a guy that wanted you dead? I mean, how much would he have to prove? How much would he have to say sorry to you? And Saul's not even apologizing. If someone was king and wanted you dead, imagine that. You're on my assassination list, but be my chief of staff. What? Mentally, normally, humanly, David is nuts. But he's not. He's that confident in God. David knows it's spiritual warfare. David knows it. Verse 8, war broke out again after that. David left his troops against the Philistines. He attacked them with such fury that they all what? You think he knew God was with him? I went to fight the Philistines. I didn't have to kill them. They all just ran away. That's when you know you're pretty strong. Look at what it says. I don't know if your version says this, but this is really interesting. Verse 8, war broke out again after that. And David led his troops against the Philistines. He attacked them with such fury that they all ran away. God is there. It's working. God's power. Then the very next word is but. So there's this constant, like, God is moving and he's working, but there's all this crazy going on. But one day when Saul was sitting at home with a spear in his hand, the tormenting spirit from who? Not from the devil. From the Lord suddenly came upon him again. So you're telling me that the Lord sent a tormenting spirit? Yeah. Yeah. Because every time God is allowing stuff like that, every time God is moving like this, look at what it says. As David played his harp, why is he playing his harp? To help with the evil spirit, the tormenting spirit. Saul hurled his spear at who? But David dodged out of the way. That might sound like, oh, well, lucky him. That's got God's handprint written all over it. And leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fled and escaped into the night. Awesome. But he knows God is protecting him. He knows God is doing amazing things. And every time the devil comes, God starts to win and the king throws his spear. It doesn't tell you how close he is, but I think the context is he should have killed him. Like it was a dead-on shot. And somehow David what? Why? And David is caught between the God's with me and God's protecting me, and there might be a sense of it's kind of foolish to stand in front of Saul and waiting for him to throw another one, right? There's this kind of mixed but all through this, you can see God's hand. I'll finish with this. All through this, you can see God's protection, God's love, God's power. You can see how the enemy's losing. You can see all of this taking place, right? But how come we don't see that in our life? Like, how come we can read 1 Samuel tonight and not get mad at God a bit? Not get flustered at all. Understand that God was always winning, that this was never a fight, that God is doing all of these things. We see it in David's life, right? Don't worry if you're getting a spear shot at you, it's fine. You're going to be king. I mean, we have all of these thoughts and we understand and it's like, hey, God's just going to win. And we take that as truth tonight. God's going to win. Like, we're not reading the rest of Samuel thinking, who wins this battle? You know David's going to win, right? You know God's going to win. You already know it. How come we can't do that in our own life? How come we can't look at our circumstances and when the enemy comes against us and say, don't worry, what God did for David, he can do for me. And maybe he's not anointed you to be king, but he's anointed you for something. And whilst he wants you to do something, guess what? You think David's the only one he's ever protected? God will protect you. God will help you. God will use whatever the enemy throws at you to further your life, to further your experiences with him. We've got to see, like, again, it's easy to see the story. No one goes home thinking, is Saul doing the right thing? Is Saul going to win this? Is the enemy good? No. We got to see that in our own life. The things that have come against me aren't for my harm. They're for my good. It changes the whole perspective. Does anyone